Do you know something? In the early days, it was the old school, that head teacher. He's not a head teacher by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, that little bit of fear that you maybe have of your father as well. If your father sort of gets a bit angry with you, you know, that little bit of that dominating male of the 70s, 80s, 90s, probably going back beyond that, was apparent in Sir Alex Ferguson. That, you know, you knew when he walked into the room went quiet. There was that presence, that aura, hit the boss's ear. And so you felt it straight away. When people say to me sort of, how did you keep coming back every single year and continue to keep winning? What was the secret of that? It was by his actions and what he did. I always remember when I was 30, when did we lose the Champions League final? 2009, so I'd have been 34, right near the end of my career. I was doing we played the Champions League final on a Wednesday, we lost. We got back on the Friday from Rome, or Thursday or Friday. On the Saturday, I had to go and pick up my boots at Carrington, the training ground. So it was a Sunday morning. I had to go pick up my boots at Carrington, the training ground, to go to St George's Park because I was doing my A licence coaching badge, and it was my final assessment. And I went in at 7 o'clock in the morning. I'd organised to meet with the caretaker, who was basically there on site all the time, to let me in. And I parked on the back, and his office lights on, and he's there in his chair. I thought, oh no, I don't want to see him. We've just lost the European Cup final 4 days ago. So I drove back round the front and went in, got my boots and moved out. But he was there at Sunday morning, 6:30, 7 o'clock, the only person in the building with his light on, 4 days after we'd won the European Cup final. And he'd been in his mid-60s. And I thought, no one can live with that. That's the reason he's winning. That's the reason he's winning. Because no other manager, no other leader that I know, 4 days after that defeat, in his off time in the summer, is in his office on a Sunday morning at 6:30. And he didn't know I was coming in, obviously, and he didn't see me either. I just saw it, you could just see him in the distance. It was like, I couldn't believe it. And it just, all those sort of examples of that work ethic, they hit you every single day. And he knew how to tap into here. He knew how to get you, no matter who you were in the dressing room. He always used to get me, I always say this by mentioning he used to mention my grandparents. What about your grandparents? Getting up every single day, putting their tie on, the work that they put in, how they never complained about anything, you know, what they must have lived through, obviously, in the Second World War. And he would say things like that in his team talks, and it would always tap into me, because I used to sit with my mum's dad and look at his medals that he got during the Second World War. He'd had 3 or 4 wounds. He had shrapnel wounds in his shoulders that he could still show me, and bits of metal still in his body. And he would talk to me about the medals and where he'd got them from, and how he'd been in Holland, and how he sort of had to come back, and then he went back over, how he married my nan on one of his returns back. So that used to get me every single time. So when I used to play for United, when you think about what motivates you, what gets you going, and he used to mention, say, for instance, grandparents, and there's that difficult moment on a pitch where you think, we're struggling here a little bit. And now I think of my youngest daughter when I'm training, what keeps me going to the end of that training session. I think of silly things. If I don't keep going here, someone's going to get my youngest daughter, and there's nothing going to get her, so I've got to keep going. And there it was my granddad, my mum's dad. And I used to think he wouldn't have stopped going. He came back having been wounded twice and shrapnel wounds twice, and went back out to fight again. And he had those medals, and he would speak to me about it. And I used to think, how can I stop? But he would find that in me. Sir Alex would push those buttons and press those buttons. For someone else, it would become something completely different, I'm sure. It might be talking about the father. It might be talking about him going on strike in the Govan shipyards. It might be talking about another experience that he's had. But he would tap into everybody in the dressing room in some way that would mean they'd find something to mean they would never give in. And that's what his film's called Never Give In. He never give in, but also the influence he had on others never to give in through finding something in them was incredible.